Paul Graham was like, after the meeting, he was like, you guys look really smart on paper. But your ideas are super dumb. Do you have any other ideas that I can fund maybe? I was like, hey, this is the next big thing. That was an insane time. We didn't have much sleep. We didn't feel amazing. We didn't feel anything. We were just like, we have to do this. Yeah. It is sort of a duty from God. While I was in college, like Google was my dream job, right? And everyone used to call me like Google Prasanna in college.
Yeah, I remember that, yeah.
The biggest fear of my life has always been, and it continues to be, that my peak is behind me. And I remember when we actually raised money from Andreessen, he already heard about the site, like they had reached out. And all I did was I did google.com/analytics and I looked at them. Like, that's it.
Yeah.
They looked at the graph. How many millions do you want? I realized like growth was the drug that I was addicted to. Hypergrowth was just special, where you can compress many years of life and life experiences into a few short months. If you talk to the early employees at Rippling, I told them I knew I picked up $1 billion from the floor. It was so clear to me, it was so obvious to me that it was the easiest billion
right.
that I have ever made.
Yeah.
The unique thing about the Rippling DNA is that it is built for 0 to 1. We are actually very good at 0 to 1 because there are so many different business units that are founded inside of Rippling that made it work. It's a day one skill that we have, financialization of the internet, where the internet has like a native money or a coin is crypto, right? And I think that is the Ycombinator of our age. That is where the most ambitious or the smartest people are aggregating today.
Yeah.
Elon sort of gathered them around and looked them in the eye and said, if you use the word try one more time, you should quit. I think this is the most important thing that is going to change humanity.
Yeah. So today we have a very special guest with us. He was rank 1 in India on TopCoder, turned down 100 million worth of acquisition offers from both Google and Facebook, and then in turn ended up being a self-made billionaire through the tech companies he founded. We have Prasanna today with us, co-founder of Rippling, which is a decacorn today. Welcome to SCALER Pod, Prasanna.
Thanks, man.
And interestingly, Prasanna attributes most of this massive value creation to having identified Six Sigma events, being at the right place at the right time. So to begin with, Prasanna, I would love to ask you that, how do you define these Six Sigma events? And, like leveraging them led to creating so much impact in your life.
Sure. So Six Sigma is like the term from math, right? It's actually 6 standard deviations from mean. So, the math is more like, if you take everything that's happening in the world, like, for example, what is someone's height, and just plot it on a curve, it'll be a standard normal distribution. And most people will sort of congregate somewhere around the center. And then as you go farther and farther away from the center, you enter into the tails where the probabilities are lower and lower, right? And, at 6th standard deviation from the mean, you're sort of talking about like events with odds of like 0.0001% or something like that.
Right.
Like very rare events.
Right. Let's talk about, like in last 15 years, such events that you came across, right? First, we talked about being rank 1 in India on TopCoder, which led to, someone from a nondescript town in India so directly getting a job in US at one of the most sought after employers. That was you, right? And I remember this, I think back in 2007, this interesting event when there was someone with a username of Nemesis_NITT, someone who no one in the world knew this gentleman before. And suddenly this gentleman was rank 1 in India. Tell us about that and, your TopCoder, how TopCoder added value back then.
Sure, man. I think TopCoder is one of the first Six Sigma events that I encountered in my life. And, like that just massively accelerated my career. And being right about that, like, spending a lot of nights and weekends on TopCoder when my peers are sort of going to college and focusing on academics or whatever. I was 18 at this time, right? Like, and then finally getting the feedback that was actually the right bet. When I zoom out and watch, everyone being an automaton, just following status quo, and you go to college, and then you sort of, when you zoom out and you ask, hey, that doesn't make any sense. Like, there is this thing called TopCoder, and you can prove yourself being like a nobody.
Right.
And there is a meritocratic contest where you can, if you can solve these computer science problems, you could be like ranked one, and regardless of what your age is, regardless of where you're from, and like some of these big companies like Google, etc., were starting to hire from that. And Google is a company that did not even visit my campus for placements back in those days.
You went to NIT Trichy, right?
I went to NIT Trichy. It's one of the top colleges in India, and Google was not visiting them for campus placements. In fact, Google did not even have an India office back then. It was maybe just starting out or something. So, that was the dream job for anyone in my college by a wide margin. And, they wouldn't even get an interview there. And they were hiring from this place, And it made sense to me that that's the only thing that matters, and like colleges don't matter. But I was like the odd man out. Even though it seemed so fucking obvious, I was still the odd man out, right? And I became really good at this stuff. Like, I was ranked 1 in India. Twice Google Code Jam, world finalist, number 1 in India, twice in Google Code Jam. And before I graduated, I had an offer from Google in the US, which, nobody has ever done. Like, in my batches before, or like anyone after, like nobody from my college sort of got a job in the US or got a job from Google or anything, even for 2 years after I graduated. That never happened. And I remember when I joined college, my dad is like a government employee. And when I joined college in NIT Trichy, it's actually a really good college. So when I joined, my dad was like, asking my seniors whether I'll get a job after I finish college. And the seniors were like, like the average pay is more like 40,000, 50,000 rupees a month. And my dad at that time was making 30,000 rupees a month. Okay, like after 20, 30 years of service. And he was like, I don't understand why these kids need to get paid that much, right? And, my first job was from Google US. And, I remember like my monthly salary just like far exceeded all his life savings, like 20 years of savings, right? Like that is kind of what the delta becomes. It's just insane. And, I knew it was the right bet. I was alone. I was lonely in that bet. And honestly, it helped me a lot that I was alone because there was far less competition. And it also personally gave me the confidence that, like you don't do things that other people are doing. You have to sort of find what is special. Like TopCoder was just happening. The more time it takes, nowadays it's very, very competitive way, right? And being early on a very important trend, you can just like turbocharge your life.
So I think this was the first, as we can see that the Six Sigma event, right? That comparing to where even a time, back in 2007, 6, 7, when even a 50,000 rupees per month salary was considered, as if people are overpaid. And then suddenly being able to, kind of have this orbit shifting change to, a high paying job at Google in US. And then from there, I think when you went to US, I think there were then another similar orbit shifting changes when you co-founded LikeaLittle, and then I think your journey during YC. Tell us a little more about that. How did you come across YC, your interactions with Paul Graham and Sam Altman? Tell us about that.
So after I graduated, while I was in college, like Google was my dream job, right? And everyone used to call me like Google Prasanna in college.
I remember that,
Google gave me like a bag of goodies, like t-shirts. Everyone who wants a Google t-shirt comes to my room and gets it. So I was like almost synonymous with like Google back in college. And by the time I graduated, I had grown out of it. I turned down Google
Yeah.
to go work at Microsoft.
Right.
They just paid me like a lot more.
Right. I think that would have been the only parameter back then.
Yeah. And it was the top paying job at that time. Like, so I was making $100,000 a year.
Yeah. Wow.
That seemed, that's like nothing today, but like it was like crazy
was
back in the
insane,
days. So that was like, I sort of like sat back and realized, what the fuck, like, my dream that I thought was my dream for the longest time, I'm turning it down now. In a few years, I've outgrown it.
Yeah.
So that was like really mind blowing for me, and that was super confidence inducing.
Fascinating.
And then I went and worked at Microsoft for the first 2-3 months. Like I worked like crazy. I always thought that I was special. Like I was going in like lots of energy, young guy out of college. I remember the day I joined Microsoft. Like the week I joined Microsoft, there was a production issue.
Right.
Microsoft was trying to launch like the Bing crawler that was being built, and it had like they couldn't launch it because its performance was really poor. If you launch it like that, like you will sort of burn like tens of millions of dollars, right? And I was like, okay, and my manager's manager was sending a mail that this is the only thing that matters. This is what everyone should work on.
Right.
And by the time I was in sort of onboarding program, I wasn't even like expected to write any code or something. That night I decided like, I'm going to fix this tonight.
Wow.
Right. So I spent all night, like, spent the first hour like setting up the code base,
Right.
and like I didn't understand anything. Like I didn't understand what was going on.
Right.
But I profiled it and I knew which lines of code we had an issue. And I worked, all night, and like by the morning I sent an email saying like, hey, I think I fixed this. Like this is the profile, this is the PR, like 30 different files got changed, and this is the fix.
Right.
And I felt insanely proud about myself, right? So that was exhilarating. Like everyone was like, who's this kid that just showed up?
No, I think it's also very fascinating that often there is this question that why are engineers paid so much, right? But I think again this the amount of value creation that particularly for organizations which are at such large scale, just probably optimizing some of the routines to save few hundred milliseconds might lead to savings of tens of millions of dollars for the company, right?
Right.
And I think that fundamentally that just as a young kid,
right,
who might be being paid maybe $150,000,
right,
and one might say why, but actually you are as an engineer. There's this I think unique thing.
Right.
So much value could be created that like just order of magnitude more than what they might be getting paid.
Totally. Tons of leverage. And so I felt super special, and and then what actually happened was that code to get checked in, it took 6 months. By month 3, I'm totally checked out. I'm like, this is not the place for me.
Yeah.
It's like LeBron Jones playing basketball and passing it to someone who just fumbles the ball, who walks slowly to collect the ball back. Yeah. Like, this is not the place for me to play.
Right.
So I was like, dude, the biggest fear of my life has always been, and it continues to be, that my peak is behind me. And that was my fear.
Wow.
So it was like, fuck, like, what's the point in waking up? Like,
right.
Why do anything at all? So I was chilling for a while, and then I decided, okay, like, this doesn't work for me.
Yeah.
I need to do something. I need to make big bets again.
Right.
And, originally my thought was like, maybe I'll just freelance, set some TopCoder problems one day a week.
Yeah.
And then, just do projects that I enjoy for the rest of the time. Like, I don't need much money to live.
Right.
So maybe I'll do that. And that's when I came across Paul Graham's blogs. Mm-hmm. And that changed my life. So he started at a similar point himself. Yeah. He was freelancing and just living off of it.
Right.
And then he sort of came into this idea called startups.
Yeah.
where instead of freelancing 1 day a week for the rest of your life to pay for the other 5 days of the week, what if you collect those 1 day across the entire life and just refragment your life, so that you pack those 1 days of work into 4 years or 5 years, and then chill for the rest of your life, right? And that refragmenting was very powerful because it created non-linear returns. You know, you could just compound. If you just like, compound interest is a very powerful force.
Indeed.
And if you can pack lots of years of your life within a short period of time, you can create a lot of value and a lot of wealth.
Right.
And back in those days, even for YC, just like my ambitions when we started out was fairly minimal, right? Just to pay my bills. Back in those days when YC started out, their ambitions were fairly limited. If geeks could get a little bit rich, they could make a few $1 million.
Right.
That's a success. That is the KPI for Paul Graham.
Right.
And the KPI was like insane. Like, the actual performance was insane. Like 50% of YC founders, back in the first 3 batches or the first 4 batches were millionaires.
Yeah.
And like $1 million, again, back in those days, perhaps arguably even today, is like fuck you money.
Of course.
You don't need to listen to your boss kind of money.
True.
You don't need to work a day in your life kind of money. And that's really what I wanted to do. I wanted to roll the dice on the American dream.
Yeah.
And decided to, first of all, I recognized that it's a Six Sigma event, that this is something that is unique in the world.
Yeah.
And, this has never occurred before.
Yeah.
Internet was massively reducing the cost of starting a company, which is the trend on which YC itself was riding.
Right.
And, because of that reason, if costs of starting a company fell really low, that unlocked a new pool of founders who would have never been founders without that.
Right.
Because if you need a lot of capital, you need a lot of maturity. You need to wear some suits and go and convince the VCs to give that capital.
Right.
And if you don't need any money, if it's just to pay your own bills, then you don't need that much capital at all. And YC was creating a new market.
Right.
And unlocking something new that has never happened before in the world. And it was working.
Right.
Like, the metrics made it so clear that there is insane demand.
Yep.
Like, the performance was just amazing. Right? So again, it felt like this is the only thing that matters in the world.
Right.
Anyone else who's doing anything else is stupid. Like, you can roll your dice, you join YC, there is a 50% odds that you made fuck you money.
Right.
Why isn't anyone else doing it? Why isn't everyone doing this?
Yeah.
This is insane.
Right.
And so I thought, like, this was the most important thing that was happening in the world. This is sort of going to be the center of the world.
Yeah.
And decided to move to the Valley and give it a shot.
So you just quit your job at Microsoft?
I quit my job at Microsoft, convinced my roommate at Microsoft.
What did your parents say about that? And you were what, 22-year-old at that time?
Yeah, 22. 22.
Fascinating. Yeah. Few are, I think, but that conviction on being able to identify that Six Sigma and knowing that, like I can take that leap of faith and just try it.
Yes.
Yeah.
And in my mind, what options did I have?
Yeah.
Like, I can't continue working at Microsoft. Like, that'll be insane. That's a waste of life. It's like, I don't live another day in my life. It's sort of, like, the Buddhist monks, what they do is, if you can eat like some really tasty food, you can just remember the memory of that food and you can replay that memory again and again. You don't need to eat that food all the time. And, like, it's almost like you can just replay a day of Microsoft's life like again and again. It's the same thing, why eat that food every day?
Yeah.
So in my mind, like, I had to do something.
Yeah.
And this thing was happening.
Yeah.
This thing was so special that it was a no-brainer.
Right.
So decided to take a leap of faith and quit my job, convinced my roommate and moved to the Valley. And the first day we were in the Valley, it was to do the YC interview.
Did you make your roommate quit his job too?
Yes, of course.
Oh, wow.
And he was like, he was like, why don't we go to India and start a startup or something? We don't even have a US visa.
Right. That is what Anshuman and me did, right?
Yeah.
We came back to India to start
Right.
a company. Yeah.
Right. And I told him, dude, this is Six Sigma event.
Yeah.
Like, this is not like a normal day in your life. Like, this is something that's never going to happen before. Like, has never happened before. It's not going to happen again.
Yeah.
This is like a really important event.
Right.
We need to be here.
Right.
And convinced him to move to the valley. You know, the first day we met, we were meeting Paul Graham for a Ycombinator interview.
Wow. Paul Graham doesn't take the vice interviews anymore because, of course, the applicants are so many.
That's right.
But yeah.
That's right.
And then what happened in that interview?
And we had no clue about business.
No brainer.
yeah. We had no clue about business at all. And Paul Graham was like, after the meeting, he was like, "You guys look really smart on paper, but your ideas are super dumb. Do you have any other ideas that I can fund maybe?"
Yeah.
And I was trying to, I was like, "Hey, this is the next big thing." Like, I was doubling down on selling my idea, and he was like, no, okay, fine, guys, like, see you later.
Yeah.
And 2 batches later, Paul Graham was trying to sell me on getting into YC. He was trying to convince me hard why I should join YC, because at that point, my startup was working really well.
Right. The startup you founded, LikeaLittle.
LikeaLittle.
Right. Yeah. So what was happening there? Tell us more about that. What got Paul Graham to, chase you all, man? Please get into IC.
Yeah, like, so the first year or so, we were trying many different startup ideas. We had no clue. We were just engineers, we had no clue what would sell. We lived in our own world.
Right.
And we were delusional. We convinced ourselves we were building something useful.
Founders are always delusional.
Sure.
Yeah.
And nothing was working for the first 12 months, 18 months. We were on a tourist visa. We couldn't stay in the US, so we had to go out and back in and so on and so forth. And, nothing was really working. Each thing that we tried worked better than the previous one. So it was there was something that was happening. We weren't sure where we were going, but something was happening. And but on the whole, we just had no clue. We were just constantly changing markets that we were attacking. We were not building like a moat or an understanding of any one customer. Like, I think in retrospect, that's the biggest mistake we were making at that time, was not sticking to like one customer or one market.
One problem statement.
Exactly.
And just doubling down on that.
Exactly. You can solve like different problems for the same customer, like, closely related problems and stuff. You can build like more and more edge or understanding or advantages. Right. Balaji calls it like an idea map or an idea maze.
Right.
So, just traveling around like one area gives you a lot of understanding of that area.
Indeed.
We didn't know that. We just were all over the place. Tried so many different ideas, and the ideas won't have anything to do with each other. So that was the biggest mistake we made at that time. And then my girlfriend back in those days, now she's my wife, she called me up, and I was talking to her, and she said like there was a website called Fit Finder that was taking off in her campus. She was studying in Cambridge, UK at that time. That website was taking off in her campus. And it went from 0 to 1 million users in a month.
Oh, wow.
That was insane. That was insane at that time. Yeah. And that website got shut down by the college. Oh, wow. Because the kid was studying in college, and the college authorities did not like the website. Yeah. So they said, if you want to graduate, shut it down. And she called me and said, like, why don't you guys just copy it?
Yeah.
And that was my third Six Sigma event.
Right.
It doesn't happen every day that a site with such insane growth and demand is voluntarily shut down by the founder. In fact, the founder was he was graduating in a month, and he was planning to start the site after a month. So that was my shot at it. Yeah. That was my opportunity. Yeah. Like, having done maybe 10 different ideas and failing,
Right.
I had a clear sense that how rare these things are,
Yeah.
and I had to do it. Now that was my third Six Sigma event that I had exposure to.
Right.
So the only thing that has happened till that date was I had more and more confidence in my ability to see these Six Sigma events, these weird events that should not be happening. This free money on the table that people are letting go.
Right.
And everyone is walking around the table. It's puzzling
Yeah.
why humans are like that.
And when you see that, it's so, weird that, why are others not seeing it, right?
Right,
Yeah.
right. And I grabbed it
Yeah.
with both my hands. My co-founder was working for my previous startup. He had gone out to meet customers and he came back. And I told him, hey dude, idea changed. We're doing this now. And he was mad for some time. And then he was like, what? 1 million users? What? It shut down? What? How? So we did that. And that was my first big hit in my hands, LikeaLittle.
Yeah. And I think then you had, both Google and Facebook chasing you, Marissa Mayer coming in with probably 100 million plus check that, why don't you get merged with us? And you guys turned that down. And to be candid, that blows my mind. That, what, some 23, 24-year-old kids and both Google and Facebook are chasing you. I remember, I think since back then, I think Mark Andreessen having to not been, he invested in LikeaLittle, but not coming on the board because Zuckerberg was not happy with that.
Right.
Right. It's very crazy, right? Tell us about that. What was happening? How did you guys turn it down? What Mark had to say about what LikeaLittle could be?
So LikeaLittle again was many firsts for me.
Yeah.
From YC being as my dream thing to do, and then me turning them down.
Yeah.
That was a first.
Right.
It was sort of like outgrowing YC and like outgrowing Google.
Right.
And then $1 million being the goal of my life, like to make the $1 million like as soon as I can.
Right.
To turning down like $100 million acquisition offer, like that was outgrowing my goals.
Right.
And that was fascinating. I had the time of my life doing LikeaLittle. For the first time, I saw in my hands that I built something that is directly useful to a lot of people.
Yeah.
That was exhilarating. Every point before that, there was always like some external bottleneck. Like the rate at which I work, it doesn't matter whether I do something today or tomorrow. There were other people that were bottlenecks to the rate at which some impact happened.
Right.
There was a large difference between when I produced something and when impact actually happened. For the first time I had in my hands where I was working day and night. Like the site traffic was growing like crazy. I remember me and my co-founder sitting in all night and starting new MySQL servers. And we were like, we doubled the number of MySQL servers and we were super happy. And my co-founder was like, claps, we scaled it. Okay, tomorrow's traffic, the site will stand. And we were like, wait, how long will this withstand? And we calculated it to be 3 days.
Right.
So our traffic was doubling every 3 days.
Wow. That's, I think, the dream of almost every other founder, right?
Right. So that was an insane time. We didn't have much sleep. We didn't feel amazing. We didn't feel anything.
Yeah.
We were just like, we have to do this. It is sort of a duty from God.
Right.
When you can actually see impact out of your hands like that at the rate at which you can produce, there is no feeling like that. I've never, that is one of the best times of my life. Was
I think back then you guys just quickly after the launch you were seeing almost 20 million page views and I think 2 million active users. And I remember you were trying to get all the mercenaries as well to help scale, right? Anshuman coming into your apartment with his friends and, figuring out how to make it scale.
Yeah.
What kind of help you got from, unexpected help from people when you all were solving such problems?
Dude, we were taking off like crazy.
Yeah.
That I honestly did not have time to meet with anyone.
Yeah.
And I remember we were in a 1-bedroom house in Palo Alto near Stanford.
Yeah.
And there were all kinds of people showing up.
Yeah.
Like there were college kids who showed up saying they want to join the company. There were, any of the top investors were showing up,
Yeah.
like Michael Moritz from Sequoia.
Yeah.
The founder of Intuit was at that place. There was just like, and remember, for the last 18 months, we've been trying to raise any money at all. Nobody would even give us any money,
Yeah.
right? And everyone and their mother now wants to invest in the company. And like, we just have no time to like give any presentation or like, talk to investors even.
Yeah.
And I remember when we actually raised money from Andreessen, I went in, he already heard about the site, like they had reached out. And all I did was I did google.com/analytics and I looked at them. Like, that's it.
Yeah.
They looked at the graph. They said, how many millions do you want?
When you have that growth, you don't really need even a pitch deck, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. So that was a fascinating time of my life, the site turned out to be a fad and it sort of failed. It all happened very, very quickly.
Yeah.
Like in 9 months we hit our peak traffic.
Yeah.
And that's when Facebook and Google wanted to buy the thing.
Yeah.
And it was the hottest thing in town. It was growing faster than Facebook. We had 20 million page views within like the first 6 weeks of launch.
Wow.
And Zuck was worried. Zuckerberg was pretty worried.
Yeah.
And he sent his CTO, Brett Taylor, at that time, to our house, that 1-bedroom house, to try and buy the company. So it was definitely a very fascinating time. Like Mark Andreessen was our biggest investor, and we were talking about, hey, like, and he was like, why would you guys sell? This could be the next Facebook.
Crazy.
It's growing like crazy. Like, why would you ever sell?
Right.
And we didn't sell. We decided to take a bet on ourselves.
Yeah.
And we didn't sell. 9 months later, after the traffic crashed and after everything failed, we tried to sell. Yeah. And of course, like, nobody would buy it.
But I would like to ask you, did you ever regret that decision of not selling?
Yeah, I've definitely thought about that. I was burnt out that, like, after LikeaLittle failed and after we tried like a few different things to make it work and we couldn't make it work for, we tried for the next year or year and a half.
Yeah.
I felt like I don't want to ever do startups ever again. Because in my head, hey, listen, the ideas that I came up with didn't work.
Yeah.
And then we copied something
that
felt like it worked.
Yeah.
And then it didn't work again.
Yeah.
So it's such a long shot. Like, I don't ever want to do startups again, right? So I was feeling super burnt out in that moment. And I definitely felt like, fuck, we could have sold it and we could have been done with it, right? And, as I sort of was taking a big break in Europe post that, and doing other things, I kind of realized, I actually like this. I actually, the best time in my life was actually when I was doing that stuff.
Yeah.
And I also realized as an investor, Zuck could have sold it too.
True.
And, Zuckerberg won't be who he is, right? So I do think as an investor, going long on something that's growing very fast with the data that was available at that time was absolutely the right thing to do.
Absolutely. So you would do the same again?
I would absolutely do the same again.
Yeah.
And I was able to be dispassionate about it.
Yeah.
After I was in Netherlands. It is like a poker where you have limited information and you have to play those cards. And what has been, and that break really helped me, like, think through everything from first principles and not lose the confidence in myself.
Right.
The thing that's crazy about, like, people around me, at that time, and many people went through this experience with me, right? And a lot of them ended up like sort of taking safer jobs or whatever. And I was like, right after that, all through my life, I've never sort of taken a high paying job.
Right.
I've always been deep in equity.
Yeah.
I've always had like, millions of dollars in like paper money
Yeah.
that I did not realize.
Yeah.
And I continue to have like
Right.
a billion or billion
1.4
dollars
billion, no.
in paper money
Yeah.
that I did not realize. And I've been comfortable being the optimist,
Yeah.
even though bet after bet like turns to zero.
Yeah.
I've just been comfortable being the optimist
Right.
because I just knew that was the right poker move.
Yeah.
I could lose a few moves, but it'll come because the expected value,
Yeah.
the math is right.
Right. No, fascinating. I think that's very profound. That you use the right framework, you use the right mechanism, and you will win some, you will lose some.
Right.
But that is how the game is played.
Yes.
Right. Amazing. So I think.
And I also realized that I love playing.
Yeah.
If I'm not doing things that make people around me go, "What the fuck? Are you crazy?"
Yeah.
Then I feel like my peak is behind me.
Yeah.
And it was a part of
that's also a very interesting point about most of the founders who have been at it for long enough. Often it's a common belief that people feel that they're running for a certain goal, right? When you play a game, you celebrate when you win, you feel a little bad when you lose, but you really do not play for the win or lose. You play to play because you enjoy playing.
right.
Right. And I think that's what is with most of the startups as well. You do it just because you enjoy doing it.
Right.
No, very interesting. And I think so. LikeaLittle was, of course, at least in my view, it's a story that there could be a movie on, hopefully one day. And then you were part of building Zenefits, right, which ended up being a 4 billion plus insurtech, and then it faced some issues. Tell us a little bit about that. Why did you decide that as the next your Sigma 6 event you would take the bet of Zenefits?
So I was in Netherlands, right? After LikeaLittle failed, I was super burnt out. Got married, and my wife was working in Netherlands. I was the house husband, just sitting and chilling at home. And I missed the action.
Mm-hmm.
I realized, okay, like I actually really liked it, even though it all went to zero, it all failed. I really kind of liked it, and I wanted to get back into the action. So I was thinking, okay, what do I do now? Like, I don't want to start a company. It seems like it's all going bust.
Yeah.
It's all a huge long shot.
Yeah.
So, and I also realized like how special things that work are.
Yeah.
You can't just like decide to start a company and start one.
Yeah.
The companies that work in a big way are actually Six Sigma events themselves. So what I decided to do was to like notice them and join them way before anyone else could notice it.
Yeah.
And not try to be a founder.
Mm-hmm.
And I also didn't want to do anything in consumer internet, given I just burnt my hands on it.
Thanks to LikeaLittle.
Thanks to LikeaLittle. The painful thing was you felt like people wanted it. You felt like you were creating an impact.
Yeah.
Like you spent a few years of your life and it turns out like people just lost interest.
Yeah.
So that was very painful. The opposite of that seemed like enterprise software, where people don't leave all that often.
Yeah.
Zenefits was the fastest growing company in the world at that time.
Yeah.
I realized like growth was the drug that I was addicted to. Hypergrowth was just special.
Yeah.
Where you can compress many, many years of life and life experiences into a few short months.
Right.
And that's what I got from LikeaLittle. And that's what I was hoping to relive again.
Mm-hmm.
And Zenefits was the fastest growing company in the world at that time. It went from $0 to $50 million in ARR in 20 months.
Wow.
Has never happened before.
And that's pure SaaS.
Pure SaaS.
Wow.
Pure SaaS. Has never happened before. There are still only a handful of companies which have done that.
Indeed.
Like less than 10 in the world.
Yeah.
So it was totally a Six Sigma event.
Yeah.
I knew you can't recreate it. It doesn't happen all that often.
Right.
And I had to join it. So we had a lot of common investors, Ycombinator, Anderson Horowitz, founder was from Chennai. And we spoke, we hit it off, and I got a job as the director of engineering over there. I joined when they were valued at like $500 million. And within 6 months or 9 months, the valuation sort of 10x'd into like 4 billion or something.
Yeah. I think that was the investment from the Khosla Ventures
That was led by like the big public funds, Fidelity and people like
had
that.
invested, led a massive round back then.
Yeah. And I was feeling very smart. Up 8x or 10x, sitting on shit ton of paper money.
Yeah.
And feeling very smart. And in another 6 months, the company blew up.
Yeah.
It ran into a bunch of controversies, and the CEO, the founder, was fired.
Yeah. So Peter Conrad, I think, then he became your co-founder at Tripling, right?
Parker Conrad. Yeah.
I'm so sorry. Yeah.
So he was fired, and I thought the company is over.
Yeah.
Like the game is done.
Yeah.
And like I worked with Parker, and like he had a very clear idea maze on the territory.
Indeed.
He knew every turn that you could take in the space and what would be the result of those turns.
Yeah.
And like once the company lost him, and it was sort of trying to not innovate and trying to just like optimize on its cash flows and stuff, I knew like the next day it was over. And I quit.
Yeah.
And I quit.
Yeah.
And I also knew that no one else is going to do this. Like the competitors were just trying to just catch up to what Zenefits had done.
Yeah.
Zenefits had paused all future innovation, and it's almost imploding. And it was this sort of giant 100 billion market that was waiting to be taken.
Right.
And no one else is going to take it.
Right.
Because the big companies are already super stretched by just competing with Zenefits. Zenefits is super stretched. It's going to implode. And as a startup, to go and build that, it requires severe amounts of capital, like tens of millions of dollars, to build that big a product, to build the vision that Parker wanted to build at Zenefits.
Right.
So I knew there was an opportunity. It's almost like Google implodes because of some self-goals that people made inside. Yeah. And after it implodes, there is a huge terrain that nobody's rushing to take.
Right.
So I knew it was a huge opportunity. And I reached out to Parker and said, hey, let's start a company. And Parker was like, dude, I'm so fucking done with startups. I'm never starting a company again.
I think that was you just a few years back.
That's right.
Netherlands, right?
I'm going to Europe. He actually went to Europe.
Oh, wow. That seems to be common, path.
So he was in Europe for like 2 weeks, 3 weeks. I actually mailed him back saying, I'm sure you're going to start a company. Let's do this.
Yeah.
I didn't hear back. He actually left to Europe. So he was there in Europe for like 2 weeks, 3 weeks. And then in the press, the investors and everyone was just blaming all the failures on him.
Yeah, I remember that time. That was pretty bad, actually.
Yeah. And he was under an NDA, so he couldn't talk back to the press. And they, the investors could talk all they want. Yeah. And he couldn't say his side of the story.
And it's pretty unfortunate that, an innovator like Parker, you just have to sit back and, take all the things which are being thrown at you.
That's right.
But I would give it to him, such a strength to pass through that.
Right. Yeah. He was, there was no, he was severely depressed.
I can imagine.
At that time.
Yeah.
He was sitting in his room playing video games all day. He didn't want to do anything.
Yeah.
He was so tired.
Yeah.
And when people started really bashing him, like when the COO he had hired, he personally hired, when that guy sort of backstabbed and turned against him, and like everyone was bashing him, then there's, he can't talk to the press even. Then there's only one way to talk now.
And which is?
Which is to start a company.
Start and prove it. Fascinating.
So he said, let's do this.
Wow.
And that's how rippling got started 5 years ago.
That's so inspiring. Amazing. So then you, Parker, uh, how did you guys land on to that, what you want to build at Rippling, and which eventually has become a Decacorn, right? Super massive, successful company. You guys painted entire Bangalore with the branding, boards, talking about that engineers run Rippling. I think, and that I might speculate that might be rooted in a lot of DNA established by you, that engineers run the business. Right? So, like, would love to kind of maybe push you a little in the direction that how did you build that engineering culture at Rippling, at Zenefits? What kind of structures, what kind of goal setting, org structure, etc., facilitated that, or setting that culture in the team?
Yeah. So again, like, just sort of connecting it back
Yeah.
to the Six Sigma
Yeah.
topic that we're talking about.
Yeah.
Like, rippling founding is an obvious Six Sigma event in my head. Like, how often does a Google implode due to self goals? It had nothing to do with the market.
Right.
It was like internal mistakes in the company.
Right.
And if Google does self implode, 100 other startups will rush to take its place.
Yeah.
And I was looking around. Nobody was rushing to take its place.
Yeah.
It's crazy. It's insane. And like, okay, if Parker is starting a company, why would anyone work at Zenefits and not try to join this new company
Yeah.
where they can get like a lot more stock?
Yeah.
And it had like a lot better odds of succeeding.
Yeah.
It was the sort of mother of all no-brainers. So 2,000 people worked at Zenefits.
Yeah.
3 people reached out to Parker.
Crazy.
And I just had to be the best of 3. So 3 was my competition set, right?
To be the co-founder.
To be the co-founder of Rippling.
Rippling, yeah.
So
Did Parker tell you that there were 3 who reached out to him?
yeah, I knew it's a small click, right?
Yeah.
And the other 2 are doing very well now, by the way. All of them, the other 2 have founded companies that are worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Wow. So, the folks who see clearly, see the world clearly for what it is.
Yeah.
In a world of like just entire madness and inertia, where everyone wants to keep the next day same as the previous day, the ones who are just able to zoom out and see that, no, like, see it for what it is.
Yeah.
They're all doing pretty well, actually. So that was another Six Sigma event where I'm just like, I was convinced. I was picking up $1 billion on the floor. In fact, if you talk to the early employees that I was talking and recruiting, you're talking about engineering and recruiting.
Yeah.
And if you talk to the early employees at Rippling, I told them, I knew I picked up $1 billion from the floor. It was so clear to me. It was so obvious to me that it was the easiest billion
Right.
that I have ever made.
Yeah.
So that is again fascinating. It is just all about being around places where Six Sigma events congregate.
Right.
And noticing them when they happen.
Right.
And changing your life for it.
Right.
People thought I was crazy. Like when I started Rippling, I just had like a newborn son, like a newborn baby.
Yeah.
And people in my family could not understand why I would start a company.
Right.
And it was all consuming. Even today, the times I do miss, I do sort of miss, hey, I didn't spend a ton of time with my little baby. I had to sort of start a company.
Yeah.
But I knew these things don't come back. It's not like I don't get to plan every aspect of my life perfectly. It's when Six Sigma events come, you notice and you pull the trigger.
Yeah.
And also these events are sort of like congregating.
Yeah.
Like Zenefits was around YC and like this massive, like there are waves and mini waves. The big wave is sort of internet.
Right.
And the mini wave that it unlocks is like Ycombinator.
Yeah.
And the mini wave that unlocks is like, companies around it, like LikeaLittle
Right.
and Zenefits
Right.
and then rippling.
Right.
So I was just at a really good time and place with all of these.
Yeah. No, very, very, very interesting. And if I further double click on, the kind of tech teams that you built at Rippling, for example, when you left, it was already a fairly large team, 250 engineers or so, right? And of course, at that scale, it's very hard to, when it's a team of 5 engineers, you don't need processes, you don't need culture, right? Like everyone is in the same room, they just get shit done, right? And
Right.
and you ship fast, you deliver. But then maintaining the same amount of focus, impact at a size when it is a 250, smart engineers with you. How did you manage that? What were some of your key learnings or design choices? I'm sure for all the founders, this journey is so full of learnings, right? I often say that running a startup is the most satisfying thing about it is learning new things.
Right.
So, what were your learnings while building a high performance tech team at Rippling?
Yeah. There were lots. There were definitely lots. Rippling was the most highest density of talent team that I ever worked on.
And
I
it
could
continues
ever
to be today as
create.
well. Definitely one of the highest density talent teams.
Totally. And in the beginning, it was just the early team was full of ex-founders.
Yeah.
And ironically, they were the guys who were able to clearly see the opportunity.
Yeah.
It was just obvious.
Yeah.
And we had like so many ex-YC founders on the early team. And it was also like a survival necessity for the company because our product pitch was that there's a lot of vertical software, like vertical business units that need to get built, and we can bundle all of them and sell it as all in one.
Yeah.
So it was a necessity for us to create a lot of businesses inside of Rippling.
Yeah.
And who better to create them than the ex-founders, specifically the CTOs.
Yeah.
So that created like a great culture. Like that created a lot of sub-startups in the parent startup. So even though you might be working in a 25% team, you might just be working in a startup of like three engineers or something. So it was very important for us to maintain like a very high velocity. And we also had the hindsight bias, like the benefit of hindsight, where we had a lot of learnings from Zenefits.
Indeed.
Because this is the sort of V2 that we were building. We were able to be strongly opinionated and make some technical choices that gave us a lot of edge.
Give us some examples of that.
Yeah. So at Zenefits, as products were growing, different business units UI started diverging, which you might naturally imagine.
Yeah.
Now, because integration is the product,
Yeah.
consistency in UI was an important requirement.
It's a business need.
So we were able to spend like the month. Parker, the only thing he did for the first month was to put together like every sort of UI component that might be useful.
Yeah.
Like we had like a flow component where this was Typeform before there was Typeform.
Yeah.
Right. So we spent, Parker spent a bunch of time putting that together. On the technical side, we had an opinionated stack. No microservices. It was a monolith.
Yeah.
We had how to run background jobs, how to how to draw the boundary between the core HR model on top of which every business unit works on. So we had like very a decent sort of set of architectural components that everyone needs to use. We were very opinionated.
Yeah.
You can't pick another sort of different architecture or whatever, right? So what that made, so in practice what actually happened was we sort of hired like these great engineers who were TopCoder, top rank in India, ACM, ICPC world finalist. We were hiring all these like amazing engineers, and we were telling them they can't make engineering choices in the company. It's all made. You just have to follow the standard stack. and all their brain power, so we hired for high CPU, the brain that can perform high teraflops per second.
Yeah.
And all those teraflops are directed at one thing and one thing only, which is gaining market share.
Wow.
So we were very opinionated.
No, I think that's very, very profound, and which is might be seen as a very big divergence from often how many other startups look at their tech talent. That here you are saying that the goal of these high potential, crazy programmers, coders was capturing more market share, not coming up with a better architecture.
Right.
Right, and I think that's very, very differentiated and very, very profound thing. Very fascinating.
Right. And as we scaled, so you were asking about the challenges that arose, right? As we scaled, I did not scale. Like, I was not good at my job. So I was really good. I think when there were 25 engineers, 50 engineers, 5 engineers, I was great.
Yeah.
And when there were like 100, 200, I was just like not doing a good job. And things will break everywhere. And I would just be frustrated. Hey, why didn't you think like this? And that was sort of like a repetitive cycle. And my co-founder was frustrated with me. I was sort of frustrated with people below me. Like, why aren't you behaving like owners?
Yeah. So basically, you were mostly firefighting every day.
I was firefighting every day.
How did you fix
long
that?
days. Eventually we sort of got someone to run engineering who knew what they were doing. And I learned a lot from that experience, actually. The biggest thing that I learned was the value of this thing called culture and stuff. I used to be, I'm a 0 to 1 guy, and like I thought like culture and all that is like jargons that big companies use to sound good, to look good. And I didn't see the value in it. And then what I sort of actually saw was, the first principle. So I was able to experience it from first principles. When you start something new,
Right.
You sort of experience, you get to run the A/B test for what happens if you don't have it.
Yeah.
And the thing that I learned was, like, as you hire more and more smart people, like when you're growing really fast, you don't have a ton of time to bring everyone on and train them.
Yeah.
Right. And you're growing, like we were growing on our eng teams like 2x, 3x a year, right?
Yeah.
So the average age of an engineer in the company is like 3 months or 4 months, right? So what did they know about any of this stuff? So you don't have a ton of bandwidth to train them.
Right.
And often what you're doing as a result, as a coping mechanism, is you're hiring more senior and higher sort of experienced people who don't need that much training. They come in and they can perform, right? And then what happens if you do that is you're sort of hiring people to drive your car for you, and you're hiring like pretty good drivers by default. They'll make by default like very rational choices. Those are the right hires to make, right? And once you do that a few times, then you notice that your org is becoming really slow. And you notice that you're sort of starting to operate more and more and more like a big company. Like, I call it mean reversion. Like, any outlier startup is founded on some contrarian insight.
Right.
And a startup sort of starts at like several standard deviations of the mean.
Right.
And when you get like normal people in the company
Right.
who make like really good normal decisions, the company tends towards the normal.
Right. The
Which is the
unique
mean.
identity or that intuition
Right.
starts getting lost.
That's
that
lost.
process. Yeah.
That's lost. So it starts behaving more and more like a really big company like Google or something.
Yeah.
Because those are the safe defaults for a reason.
Yeah.
They just work in most circumstances.
Right.
And then there's nothing differentiated about yourself, the company. And that is why it was so frustrating. I was fighting that mean reversion by saying, if you just cared more,
Yeah.
maybe this wouldn't have happened.
Right.
And I realized that's not the way to fight it. That is super blunt weapon, So what in retrospect, I realize the job of someone like the leader who's scaling is actually, or the founder who's scaling actually, is actually to look inside his brain, run a debug PDB trace on my own brain of like, hey, why do I think we should have an opinionated stack? Why should other people not develop their own technology? Why is that? And why are we willing to pay a big cost for this contrarian opinion?
Right.
Because anytime you have a contrarian opinion, there are some real costs.
Right.
And to avoid those costs is why like reasonably smart people mean revert.
Right.
So you have to like trace through your brain and ask like, why is this the right decision for us?
Right.
And why are we willing to pay these obvious costs in front of us? Like engineers won't join you
Right.
because, they can't build cool architecture.
Right.
They need to sort of work on business
Right.
or something.
Right.
And that's still worth it. Like,
Right.
You stand for something and you're willing to die for something.
Yeah.
And that's still worth it for our business. Why is that? Right. So you need to sort of like make a case, not just a case, but also like why you personally think that.
Yeah.
So you have to, and there is not a lot you can communicate
Right.
in the culture. So culture is like few nuggets of statements that can penetrate a large org,
Right.
where they can just like, that is something that they can remember
Right.
and use as frameworks to make decisions when they're alone. And you can't communicate a lot, they won't remember a lot.
True.
So you have to distill it down
Right.
to a few things that we do differently here
Right.
and why that matters.
Right.
So a lot of this is about just like tracing what goes on, looking internally first of all,
Right.
and tracing what goes on inside and exposing the software
Yeah.
and installing that software in other brains that you hire.
Making those intuitions and the insights more transferable.
Right.
So distill it down in a way, debug your own brain,
Right.
trace it.
Right.
How you are making those intuitive decisions.
Right.
Because of course, a large team can not be dependent on you.
Right.
They cannot fall back on you. You have to be able to transition that to, and that is fundamentally, I think, what the culture is.
Right.
Right.
Exactly.
Fascinating. So how did you do that? Or if you could, give us some examples that, what were some of such transferable, or if I can talk, ask you that what were the first principles that you distilled down, which you passed on to the rest of the team at Rippling, and which enabled that?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we spoke about the opinionated stack thing. One of the important culture statements we had was like, we solve big problems. We sort of bet more on the fat startup, not on the lean startup. By that, we mean like, when we launch a new product, we really sort of like do a high production work. Like we don't A/B test. Like we're not sort of looking for guidance from the market. We have an opinion.
So you build on those insights, the opinions which are built on insights.
Right.
And then you do not really need the A/B test, right?
Right.
I think we live in a world where all the arguments generally boil down to, okay, let's do an A/B test.
Yeah.
But that's pretty, I think, in sometimes it's not the smart tool, right?
Right.
It's pretty, if I may say, it's a very simpleton tool.
Right.
Right. But if you have deep insights, you just run with that.
Right. Right.
Interesting.
Also, like we are actually very consciously built. I mean, the unique thing about the Rippling DNA is that it is built for 0 to 1. We're actually very, very good at 0 to 1 because there are so many different business units that are founded inside of Rippling that made it work. It's a day one skill that we have. And we do a lot to protect the new 0 to 1 babies, like the new business units that get formed from what we call the tyranny of the functional organizations.
Yeah.
So like, your legal department wants everyone to, follow law to the book. Your customer support department wants everyone to produce great documentation. Your sales department wants X and Y and Z.
Yeah.
To the extent where, when you do a 0 to 1, if you can isolate that part of the company from the tyranny of the sort of functional units,
Right.
that sort of helps you keep that 0 to 1 DNA.
Yeah, yeah. No, that's really, really important. Just like, in a forest with really big trees, if you have a bunch of functional units which are super heavy or few business units which have grown so big, it often becomes, very hard or close to impossible for a new idea to kind of, grow in that space. But it's super important because if that doesn't happen, the entire forest will die one day, right? So I think creating like in at Scalar we call them loon shots,
Right.
right? That fine, there might be few business units which are chasing big targets where just maybe a single digit % might create millions of dollars worth value.
Right.
But despite that, it's important that we keep taking the new bets.
Yes.
And I think there have been examples. Nokia was one example which lost the entire market share because they didn't innovate.
Right.
Right. No, very, very fascinating.
And the key thing is actually to do that, there are some people in the company who will get upset. What that means is the customer support team, like there are costs to that.
Yeah.
What that means is, the customer support team is sort of doesn't know
Right.
how to support like a new product.
Right.
There are some costs to that.
Right.
So, very early on, it's worth paying.
Yeah. Very, very fascinating. On a closing note, we talked about different Six Sigma events that you were able to identify in the past and which you were able to leverage to create a massive value for yourself and the world, right? If I ask you to spill the beans and tell our audience that as of today, year 2022, what are some of these Six Sigma events that you see happening around you, right? And I'm sure it's not a zero-sum game, right? Like more people who latch onto it, the more value could get created there.
Totally.
If you can tell us about what are the things that you see today that could become, really, really big needle movers in the world out there in coming years.
Absolutely, man. I think the big wave that is just transforming society extremely fast, and the wave that we all rode, perhaps like every listener in this podcast rode, is the internet.
Yeah.
Internet is just transformative to society, right? And a natural extension of the internet, which is sort of financialization of the internet, where the internet has like a native money or a coin, is crypto, right? And I think that is the Ycombinator of our age. That is where the most ambitious or the smartest people are aggregating today.
Yeah.
Back in the days, it was Ycombinator. That is where the best brains in the world came together.
Yeah.
And today, the most optimistic place in the world is actually crypto.
Right.
That is where the best talents are, and that is where the biggest impact is getting created.
Right.
And I think internet is just like massive and huge for humanity.
Yeah.
Like if you really, really zoom out and ask, what are the most significant events that happen to life on Earth?
Yeah.
You might say there is single-celled organisms, multi-celled organisms. Life came to land, rise of human beings.
Yeah.
And right after that, an alien would say, when we all connected our brains at the speeds of light through fibers, so that all our ideas, regardless of where we are, could just get exchanged instantly at the speed of light.
Yeah.
Like biological brains started having digital wires and connecting it together all over the world. I think that is just massive. That is the most important thing after sort of rise of human beings that is happening to biological life itself.
Yeah.
And the transformations that it's going to cause are just like unseen.
Right.
And the tip of the spear of that transformation today is crypto. And we're going to see massive rewrites of the internet, first of all. When internet got formed, it was fairly easy sitting in 99, 98 to foresee what it's going to do to humanity.
Yeah.
If you take any segment in the world and ask what is going to be how is that segment going to behave in the age of the internet? If you asked how are taxis going to work, you would trivially come up with Uber.
Right.
How are hotels going to work? You will trivially come up with Airbnb.
Right.
How are retail shops going to work? You will trivially come up with Amazon. And people did come up with those things. Right. And it takes a long time for those things to become true.
Right.
Crypto is in a similar movement right now, where you can just take pretty much any sector of the economy and ask, what is it going to look like in the age of crypto? And you would trivially come up with the right answers.
Yeah.
It is that $1 billion lying down on the floor that nobody is picking.
Yeah.
It is just like everyone knows.
Yeah.
And yet they don't know.
Right.
And this is the only thing that matters. This is the only thing that's worth working on.
Right.
And this internet thing is just like insanely massive.
Right.
And what internet created was the consolidation of the middleman. So back in the days, we sort of had an imagination where internet is going to kill the middleman.
Yeah.
The travel agent,
Yeah.
the hotel booking guy, all those guys are going to die.
Right.
But instead, what it did was it consolidated
Yeah.
the middleman into into the booking.coms of the world,
Yeah.
or the Facebook.
Yeah.
The newspapers got consolidated,
Yeah.
right? And crypto is sort of like decent, and these guys have become monopolies.
Yeah.
They have like huge amounts of power.
Right.
So internet, where there is the best product, can just like take over
Yeah.
all the users.
Yeah.
Because the marginal cost of adding another extra user
Right.
to that product is zero.
Yep.
So then what does humanity do? The best product gets all the users,
Yeah.
right? And that's the sort of end state,
Right.
is that these guys just become monopolies.
Yeah.
And that's where we are living through.
Yeah.
And crypto is like a nice tweak on top of it. Why are these guys monopolies? Because they have like a database called MySQL, on top of which all these users are living.
Yeah.
And if you think about Amazon, for example, there is buyers, there is sellers, and there is some inventory. All this stuff is living in a database called MySQL.
Yeah.
And because Amazon has root privileges to that database, they can change the rules of the game anytime they want.
Yeah. And they can tax it as much as they want.
They can tax it as much as they want because they have root privileges to the database.
Yeah.
What if you took that database and decentralized it? Like, what if there are like 1 million masters running all over the world,
Yeah.
which is together agreeing on the state of the database?
Yeah.
And that's called a blockchain.
Yeah.
So I personally believe the MySQLs are out for disruption into the blockchain. And in that new model or architecture, you don't need like centralized companies. The rules can't change that easily.
Yeah.
And you can build on top of it.
Yeah.
And the smartest people in the world are working on that.
Right.
I mean, even if I think about like the simplest thing back home is like, how will rippling get disrupted in the age of blockchains, right? If you think about it, like, you have a rippling app store, and I think rippling is going to be worth a lot of money. I think rippling could be worth like $1 trillion.
Yeah.
It is the Microsoft of SaaS,
Yeah.
where any SaaS software that anyone develops pays a tax to rippling. So as people use more and more SaaS applications, like rippling sort of is the index fund of SaaS.
Yeah.
They all pay a tax to rippling.
Yeah.
It's like, and rippling has insane monopolies there.
Right.
If it were on the blockchain, if this MySQL was decentralized,
Yeah.
you don't need to talk to the rippling BD to build on top of it.
Right.
You can just like build for the APIs.
Right.
You don't need to, in case rippling got hacked or something, your MySQL, all your data that you put in this rippling MySQL, assuming that it's all a secret, it all comes out. Like it's all, and rippling knows this, they're doing all that they can to prevent it.
Right.
But, it's not a if, right? It's a when.
Yeah. It's a win. Yeah.
Like everyone gets hacked.
Absolutely.
Like Facebook gets hacked.
Yeah.
Uber gets hacked.
Yeah.
So, just a much superior architecture is like complete decentralization, where there is like a host of MySQL that's running out there. The APIs are all like just smart contracts on the blockchain.
Right.
And, if you're running payroll for your company, you have an app on your phone which has the sort of decryption key
Right.
to the data that's living on the blockchain.
Right.
And people within your company alone have the decryption key. So even if rippling wants, like we ourselves can't see the salary of your employees.
Right.
That's just, we don't have root access to that database.
Right.
That's just like a much better world where people can build on top of it
Right.
without any fear that the taxes are going to increase.
Right.
Like as a result of that, like, it becomes more investable.
Yeah.
The big fear is just like, if you're on top of someone else's platform,
Right.
can you even become a big company?
Yeah.
So blockchain really sort of removes that. It removes all kinds of centralization.
Right.
And internet is naturally a consolidating force.
Right.
And as a result of that, if you don't want monopolies, you have to decentralize. And internet is sort of re-architecting itself
Right. Right.
towards this new future.
No, very fascinating. And I think often it's a little bit of misconception that people feel that blockchain is just about crypto, but it's much more than that.
Right.
Right. And that just the just the crypto or the Bitcoin or the Ethereum part of that has led to more speculative, nature of it. But the blockchain at its core is much more fundamental technology or, kind of framework on which so much more could be built, right?
I think, crypto and blockchains are actually totally, they're sort of go hand in hand. Like that is sort of the fundamental disruption. You can think of like, what is the fundamental disruption of blockchain? It is this decentralized MySQL database, and as a result of that, it is internet having a native currency.
Yeah.
If you have a decentralized MySQL database,
Yeah.
how do you decide
Yeah.
who gets to write to it?
Right.
You need to run an auction.
Yeah.
Like if it's capitalism at its finest. And to run an auction, you need an economy. And for that economy, you need a coin. Right? So if HTTP request or like every request to this database, you have to charge money, because otherwise there will be DDoSing and
There's
spam
infrastructure,
and so on.
yeah.
So the foundational innovation of crypto is actually financialization of the internet.
Very interesting.
Everything is going to get financialized.
Right.
And there are going to be like massively liquid markets.
Right.
Where these game theoretical dynamics are just built in. Like there was like you can imagine building Uber on the blockchain, where the equivalent of that is a company called Uniswap. That is one of the biggest companies that got built on the blockchain. And the way it works is they're trying to create one of the largest exchanges in the world. And it probably is already one of the largest exchanges. I mean, I think it sort of trades maybe 10% of the volume of NASDAQ today. So it's actually insanely big. Many people don't know about it.
Right.
And when you create a company, the way I think about creating a company is actually you're sort of creating a Ponzi scheme. It is a new way to organize humanity, right? So, for example, you can imagine, let's take the case of Uber, right? So Travis Kalanick needs to sell to the world why they have to sort of reorganize in this manner. And the people, the participants in this pitch are actually potential drivers, potential riders, potential employees, potential press, investors, all these people. The more these people believe, if all of them believe, then Uber becomes like the new future, the new reality, right?
And that's a big change in a very fundamental way. In the old world, when, say, Travis had to go raise funds, he will have to go pitch to some sovereign, some private equity. But very few people control that entire dynamics.
Correct.
And in this new world, everyone becomes a participant. As you said, it's a driver, it's a consumer, it's a tax, vehicle owner, fleet owner. Anyone could be participating.
That's right.
That definitely changes it in a very, very fundamental way.
That's right.
Yeah.
So what actually happens on the blockchain is that this data is all public. So every second, investors will be watching how much trade volume Uniswap has. And the more the volume it has, the more the price of Uniswap goes up, because it makes spread on the exchange, right? And then more the price of Uniswap that goes up, Uniswap had a incentivization scheme, where if you were to deposit your assets in Uniswap, they will pay you some portion of their company. Like let's say 10% of the equity of Uniswap is paid out to anyone who deposits their funds inside Uniswap. So if the price of Uniswap tokens go up, you get a higher incentive to deposit more funds into Uniswap. And if more funds are invested in Uniswap, anyone who wants to, you can trade more volume on top of Uniswap. So more traders come in. Because more traders come in, you make more trading fees, because of which the price of Uniswap goes up, because of which more people come to deposit their money, because of which more traders can come, and so on. And that's a cycle that goes on and on. In the Uber's case, that cycle is sort of rate limited by people discovering it. Travis going and pitching to people every once in 9 months or something, press having a certain frequency with which it's willing to write about Uber. So it's sort of rate limited by all kinds of real world constraints. But if you sort of take out those rate limits and operate at the speed of light on the fiber, where anyone can look at the blockchain and see what the state is at any second,
Right.
The human consensus gets built in an extremely short time span. Like Uniswap, in fact, gathered 10 billion in assets under management within the first 18 months of launch.
I think that would have been one of the fastest growth exchange
It is.
ever
It
in
is.
the history of mankind.
Totally.
Yeah.
That blew my mind. Like then I knew
Right.
that this is actually the new YC.
Wow. So that's the new Six Sigma that you have
That
identified.
is absolutely the new Six
Yeah,
Sigma.
and probably in next decade, half a decade, 2 decade, we might see the real impact of that.
Right.
Fascinating.
Like when I was doing LikeaLittle, and I was sort of when it was sort of not working, I stumbled into the Bitcoin white paper. This was 2012. I had like $10,000 to my name at that time.
Okay.
And when I read it, I knew this was not really even a Six Sigma event. This is like a 9 Sigma event or something.
That was 2012?
2012.
Okay.
And I put half my money, like $5,000, and bought 50 Bitcoins.
Wow. How much is that worth today? And what have been the peak value?
I mean, it is worth a lot. It is worth a lot. I don't even know. And the insane thing is that just like I outgrew Google and I outgrew YC,
Yeah.
and I actually even outgrew that bet. The insane thing is my net worth grew way faster
Yeah.
than even Bitcoin grew.
Yeah.
So that was that was just super fascinating to me.
But yeah, owning 50 Bitcoins is crazy. It's mad. and you're saying you have outgrown that. You don't track it anymore. Crazy.
And I sort of definitely realized like there is a new thing that's happening here. I originally thought it was just Bitcoin, but soon when Uniswap happened, I knew it was like way more than that.
Yeah.
Like this is just going to transform social organization. Like the biggest thing that I learned through all these Six Sigma events, following and tracking all of this, is it sort of keeps coming back to the question that Peter Thiel asks in his book 0 to 1. What is the bottleneck to wealth creation or like human progress?
Mm-hmm.
What is the bottleneck?
Yeah.
There is one argument you could make that it's all about, why does all the most important company in the world get created within a 30-mile radius called Silicon Valley?
Yeah.
Like, why is that happening?
Yeah.
Some might say that's where all the venture capitalists, that's where all the risk-taking money is.
Yeah.
Some might say that's where all the talent is, the best in the world sort of go there to start companies. There is some truth to all of that. Some might say the world is sort of limited by opportunity. There are only a few opportunities, and the capital and talent are not really bottlenecks.
Yeah.
Whatever opportunities are, people build for it. And the case for that is China.
Yeah.
Like they didn't let any external money in.
Right.
They didn't let any external talent in.
Right.
But they still have like a fairly sophisticated Facebook or whatever.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So they didn't miss out too much, right?
Yeah.
That's the case for maybe it is limited by opportunity.
Yeah.
But clearly something is changing. We all see, the rate of innovation right now is just like way higher than at any time in the past.
Yeah.
And this this sort of like directly sort of leads me to believe, like my sort of mental model right now is the rate limiter is actually optimism and faith and belief. And that is sort of my working hypothesis why all of this is what the bottleneck is. So
yeah, that's very, very profound. Again, like these nuggets that I have been able to catch on to in between, and I can actually relate with that as well. Often we say that it's the capital which is a rate limiting factor, or we say it's the talent which is rate limiting factor, or one say that it's opportunities. But interestingly, probably cutting across all of these, it's the optimism and belief that great things would happen. And I think I can connect that back to the events of LikeaLittle that you were talking about, that turning down $100 million company, and after 6 months, no one willing to buy it for anything.
Right.
And despite that thread of optimism that we would be able to build something which creates a lot of value. Like even if capital is available or not available, if talent is available or not available, but people who have the optimism eventually end up creating a lot of value.
And also, it is always fascinating to me that like a lot of successful startups are kind of like cults.
Yeah.
This was again mental model introduced by Peter Thiel, where like the some of these learnings is also like from the cohort that were around me at that time, like the YC founders. They've all gone on to do like amazing things. Carrie Tan, or like the folks who were around at that time who stuck around the Six Sigma event called YC. They all got more and more bold as time went on. Like, I mean, I remember Sam Altman being like this crazy guy. When he made like $100 million, he put 10 million into this new company called OpenAI. And it was like a non-profit thing that he was doing. He thought AGI was going to crack. And I thought like, that's crazy. He's just like lost his mind. And more recently, I met with Sam. He came home once for dinner. And the backdrop is he put like 300 million into a company, into a nuclear fusion reactor. And, he was like, nuclear fusion is working now.
Oh, wow.
And that was like, holy fuck, like, how bold have we grown?
Did you tell Sam that, have you gone crazy? Why would you put $300 million in a nuclear fusion company?
Absolutely. I told him, dude, I thought you were crazy when you did OpenAI. Now OpenAI is working like crazy. OpenAI is making like 100 million ARR or something, and it's worth like $10 billion. And now he's doing this 300 mil into a nuclear fusion reactor. And I thought that was like fucking crazy. And then he told me a story. I asked him, why the fuck would you put 300 million in a nuclear reactor? You could have gotten almost the same amount of equity for like a tiny amount of the money. Like, why would you do this? And he only had like 500 million in his bank. So that's just, he put 300 million in a single company, right? So, he's doing pretty crazy stuff. And he's getting bolder as time goes, right? Like all of us are getting bolder. You guys are getting bolder. You guys are doing some crazy stuff now. So the story that Sam told me was when OpenAI was founded and he did that 10 million check, he took the team to meet Elon Musk. And Elon Musk understood only half, maybe, of what they were talking about. They were showing a chart of Moore's law, where if you throw more and more CPU on these models, like how, they were getting smarter and smarter. So it almost followed a predictable curve, and they had predictions on what they could do at like how much dollar value of CPU that you throw at it. And the CPU itself was diminishing in price, right? So the pitch was, this is just inevitable that computers are going to get insanely smart if you throw CPU at it. And Elon maybe understood like half of what they were saying, but he sort of got the bigger picture. And Elon, and they were saying, we want to try this, we want to try that, we have some ideas. And Elon sort of gathered them around and looked them in the eye and said, if you use the word try one more time, you should quit. I think this is the most important thing that is going to change humanity. I want to put $50 million into the company right now for 10% of the company. And he wrote that check. And, and again, like, why should Elon value this company at like 500 million? He could have valued it at 250 million. That would have been just as crazy. He could have valued it at 100 million. No one else was giving money at that time at 100 million price. So what is Elon doing there? And yet, if you think about it, it is one of the best investments of venture capital. Some 500 million, it's now worth 10 or 20 billion. So what is Elon doing there? What Elon is doing is actually the oldest trick in the book of how you create cults. You open your hand, take a knife, and you cut it, and you spill blood. And what Elon is saying, you see my blood? This is worth it to me. Is it fucking worth it to you? Are you mad enough right now to go get this? We don't try, we're going to win. That is what he's doing.
I think that $50 million that Elon put in, or the $300 million check that the Sam wrote to the fusion company is, the spill of their blood.
That's right.
But I'm willing to go down with it.
That's right.
Do you believe in this or not?
That's right.
Yeah.
And that is the bottleneck.
Yeah.
for progress in humanity.
Yeah. And I think that is where they have unlocked the optimism.
Right.
They're optimistic that it will work.
That's right.
And I think that could be one of the fundamental reasons that, the SpaceX, the Tesla, or, the YC,
Right.
why they are going so crazy.
Right. And once you build that, even if the world, in fact, if the world says it's not going to work, that is actually fuel
Yeah.
that energizes them
Yeah.
to fucking go at it.
Yeah. That's such a great note to end the session, Prasanna. Thank you so much for sharing these fascinating. I had goosebumps multiple times in between this, and I'm sure many of our audience will get the same.
Thanks,
Thank you
man.
so much.
Thank you.